Hello, this is the beginning of the second week of our series of videos about what's happening in Syria and what Syria is all about, as a matter of fact. And I can already tell you now that we shall have it throughout this week, perhaps also a couple next week. And my idea is to make it all like an online university on Syria. So when we come to the end of the series, I will give you my recommendations as to the order of videos, how to watch them and put them as one compact unit that will be your online university on Syria, and all for free. So that's a good bargain, I believe. And that brings me now to where we ended on Thursday in our last video of last week, the first week of this series, and it was about Turkey. And I made the point that I will simply sum up now, but we detailed it last time, that even though it may look that Turkey is the big winner of the current situation in Syria, I would call caution, very much so, about all the far-reaching, I think, predictions about the fact that Turkey is becoming now the dominant power in Syria. Or some commentators even went as far as suggesting that the neo-Ottomanism vision of Erdogan, the president of Turkey, if there is indeed such a vision, which is also a problem, is going to materialize in the case of Syria. And I would say, not so fast, not so fast. And I explained why last time. I would just say that, yes, there are already high-level Turkish visits in Syria, and were statements made about the future relation between Turkey and Syria. One of them was that Turkey is ready to supply Syria arms to rebuild its army. It's some kind of an aggressive statement. And the other statement was, but we are not going to play the role that Iran played in Syria. So we'll see. The Turks are weighing their options, and the question really is what will happen in the future. That remains to be seen. We'll come to that in the end of the series when we shall finalize this series with some kind of summations, and I will take the risk of predictions. I promise you that. But whenever we see anything being said and mentioned, written about the win of Turkey, we also read about the loss of Iran. That's for sure. Iran lost. Now let me explain something to start with. We've heard for years about the so-called Shi'i crescent, that Iran has tried to build some kind of a Shi'i crescent from Iran via Iraq and Syria to Lebanon to basically encircle Israel. And on the south of Israel, we have Sunni player, Hamas, kind of surrendering Israel with the exception of Jordan to the east. And the question really is, why would Iran like to do something like that? Why would Iran like to do something like that? In history of Islam, there was a time, much more so 10th, 11th centuries, when there were Shi'i dynasties in most of this area. But ever since the 11th, 12th centuries, until the becoming of Iran, of Persia, as a Shi'i state in the 16th century, in the beginning of it, all this time it was totally Sunni Middle East, and then after Iran became the Shi'i state, it was only Iran that was Shi'i in the Middle East, and that, of course, changed after all these upheavals in Iran itself with the revolution in 1979. Yeah. So obviously, one might say, look, they wanted to spread Shi'i Islam all over the Middle East. That's true. That is definitely an interest. But there was something else that can explain it. The creation of the Shi'i crescent was supposed to be the weapon with which Iran would materialize its vision about the destruction of Israel. The overall investment in this creation of the Shi'i crescent, and particularly in Syria and Lebanon with Hezbollah, was such that it couldn't be explained other than the fact that this was a very strong, profound, deep, and genuine ideological commitment to bring about the destruction of Israel. And we don't even mention the nuclear program. We'll come to that, of course, in this series in a way. It's not the main topic because we talk about Iran and Syria. So Syria was supposed to be a very significant chain in all this link. And that brings it back to the Syrian part of the alliance between Syria and Iran. Look, we talk about the Middle East, so we always talk about instability, almost like the chronic instability of the Middle East. But if there are alliances in the Middle East, or if there are agreements or treaties that keep going for decades, so we have to mention them as the exceptions to the rule and therefore why they are. And one of them was the Iranian-Syrian alliance from 1979 that held until just a few weeks ago, for over 40 years. It's a lot in the Middle East. By the way, in that year, 1979, also the formal peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. One cannot speak about an alliance here, but the stability of this peace treaty is a very significant pillar of stability overall in the Middle East, or at least something that prevents a complete chaos in the Middle East. This alliance between Syria and Iran, to start with, was taken to be a very strange one. I myself wrote an article about that way back in one of the books that were written about Iran's foreign policy in the Middle East, with the editing of the #1 expert on Iran, really, Professor David Menashri, one of my mentors from Tel Aviv University, where I raised the question, these bedfellows, secular so-called Ba'athist Syria on the one hand, and the Islamic Republic of Iran. But then, of course, there were explanations. And one of them was the religious one, which brings us to the question of, are the Alawis of Syria really Shiis? Or maybe the question should be, does it really matter? And I will explain. So I'm not going to get into all this very significant and interesting discussion and debate about the relationship between Alawism and Shiism. Yes, I know that there was a fatwa issued by the famous vanished Imam of Lebanon, the Imam Musa Sadr, in 1973 about the Alawis being Shiis, but if you read the fatwa was interesting because it basically talked about the fact that the Alawis and the Shiis were persecuted and so on and so forth. It was definitely motivated by political considerations to create an alliance or to strengthen an alliance between the Shiis of Lebanon and the Alawis of Syria, at that time already under Hafez al-Assad. It was 1973. And also to refer to specific situation in the city of Tripoli in the north of Lebanon, where there is a strong Sunni majority, but also a large or significant Alawi minority. And it was a problematic fatwa because it wasn't so simple to say that the Alawis are Shiis with all the facts that we know about the secrecy of the Alawi religion, despite it being secret, and still what we know about it. One can say at most it is an offshoot of Shia Islam, but never really Shia Islam. But still, there was some closeness here. And after 1979, it was the interest of the Iranians to keep promoting this relationship, even though they had issues with it. I'll give you just one example. After the terrible massacre that Hafez Assad committed against the Sunni population of the city of Hama in Syria, that now was, by the way, liberated on the way to Damascus. So the most famous Shia scholar in San Francisco in the US, Hamid Algar, interesting fellow because he was a convert from Christianity to Sunni Islam, then to Shia Islam. He was apologetic about all that. Well, how could it be really that we as Islamic Republic support this regime in Syria? And he explained that even the Prophet Muhammad had a truce, right? The Udna with the pagans, and then you know what happened. So it was an interesting remark, but the fact is that this was a religious element in the alliance, but it was also, there were also other factors here at play, and one of them we saw right after the revolution in 1980 onwards, the Iraq-Iran war, when the Ba'ath regime in Iraq, the arrival of the Ba'ath regime in Syria was fighting Iran, and Syria was the only country in the Arab world which supported the Iranians. And that caused damage to Hafez al-Assad regime. It wasn't that simple. Because it aroused the question as to who are the Alawis. if he wanted to get legitimacy to his regime from Iran by being considered as a Shi'i, now that he exposed himself or his regime as being Shi'i in a world that was dominated by the Sunnis in a war against the Shi'i Iran, he still showed vulnerability in that context. So the religious factor was very, very significant. But then, of course, there was the question of Lebanon. The question of Lebanon, in which there was a large Shi'i population that became the one single largest religious community in Lebanon because of all the demographic changes in Lebanon, which became the allies of Syria, something that helped the Syrians in dealing with the aftermath of the Israeli invasion to Lebanon in 1982 through the use of Hezbollah. So there is a multiplicity of considerations about the strengths of this alliance between Syria and Iran. And then there is something else. The fact of the matter is that whenever Syria of Hafez Assad and then Bashar Assad was confronted or was presented with the possibility of making peace with Israel, even when the Israelis, even under Netanyahu in 1998 and 1999, and I say something that I know about, was ready to make far-reaching concessions to Syria, basically to give them the Golan Heights, but for a little strip of land around the part of the Kinneret Lake, Sea of Galilee, as people call it. And the Syrians rejected it, both Hafez and Bashar. And the question always was why? Here is a possible answer. Because the Syrian regimes of Hafez and Bashar Assad knew that peace with Israel would create for them questions of legitimacy in Syria. Oh, these Alawites, they're not really good Muslims. See what they do about so-called Palestine problem, about Israel. It will also break down their alliance with Iran. And they really wanted to keep the alliance in Iran for the rainy day that may come to their regime. That is to say, the Syrian regimes of Hafez and Bashar, particularly Bashar, by the way, who was also presented with far-reaching, I say it again, far-reaching Israeli proposals about territorial concessions. And he rejected them because he did not want to break his alliance with Iran, figuring out that this alliance would be very, very significant for the defense of his regime when the day comes and this regime will be again challenged by the Sunni population of Syria, as it was with the father, with Hafez in the 1970s. We mentioned that in one of our previous videos, and could happen again. And from his perspective, he was right, because Iran and Hezbollah were the main pillars, and later on also Russia, of course, that upheld this regime and allowed it to survive the 7, 8, or 9, 10 first years of the so-called civil war in Syria, of course, almost 12 years, until what happened recently. And Iran, in that sense, had an investment in Syria which was highly significant, very costly, and seemed to be beneficial and profitable. Not anymore. Not anymore. And that is what will be the beginning of our video tomorrow, to talk more about the Syrian-Iranian alliance and also to connect Hezbollah to all that. And obviously, it will bring us to the role of Israel. That will be the video afterwards. So I will say goodbye to you today. We'll meet again tomorrow. Thank you.